So before I get to that, I just want to say you left out the most significant part of my life history, which is that I was a classmate of yours at the University College School in London in 1967.
Too many years ago
And
to remember.
surely nothing has happened of equal significance to me in my life since. And I am thrilled to have a chance to be back in Greece. I hadn't known that Greece was the country of the year, according to The Economist, but I actually asked myself as I was coming here, if you said, who ranked as the most improved country over the last decade in the world, you could make a case for Greece. From economic basket case with catastrophic governance, massive loss of confidence, substantial risk of ejection from Europe, to a proud member of the international community, borrowing rates that 20 years ago I wouldn't have thought any country would ever have a borrowing rate as low as the rate that Greece has had in some points in the last several years. Stable, strong, confident, technocratic government. That doesn't mean there aren't a whole set of problems, but it seems to me that Greece should be very proud of the way it has come through a valley and come out the other side. And I think that for many other countries in the world, there is an enormous amount to be learned from the Greek experience. But of course, Greece as an economy of not great size is very much dependent on what happens in the global economy. I am more optimistic about a soft landing than I was a year ago. A year ago, my view was that what Samuel Johnson said about second marriage was true about soft landing. They represent the triumph of hope over experience, that there's very little experience with relatively high inflation and super low unemployment ending softly. The global economy, led by the United States, but also looking at what's happened in Japan and to a lesser extent what's happened in Europe. Growth has been somewhat stronger, and with relatively strong growth and without major recession, inflation has come down more substantially than I would have expected. It's been another dart in the picture of Mr. Phillips and his Phillips curve in important respects. So it's a better picture than I would have expected. My guess is that inflation is down a bit less durably than many people suppose. And so I'm not as confident as markets are.
Why is that?
That we're gonna, why? Because labor markets are still pretty tight. Labor power is very substantially increased in the United States and other places. There is significant restiveness. You know, federal employees got a 5% raise this year. That does not go with 2% product price inflation as an example. I'm still not sure where we're going to get in the short term on productivity growth. And I think that the risks to the current baseline scenario are much more of supply shocks, particularly coming from geopolitics, that are adverse than of supply shocks that are favorable. So I think that the Fed is not likely to cut rates quite as much as is currently priced in, not as confident that they're going to start being cut soon, and I think that's going to have some impact globally. But I do think we're in a better place than I would have expected a year ago. I do think there are three major sources of risk. I think markets are ahead of themselves in terms of the degree of optimism about the global economy, and that can unwind. I think there are substantial international geopolitical risks. The Middle East, North Korea, the widening of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a frustrated, intense China lashing out in some way. They don't each have to be that high probability to cumulatively be a non-trivial probability. And I think the third risk, which is more of a risk for the longer term than for the shorter term, is populism. What we know is that over the long term, populism is a destroyer of economies. The clearest example is that Paul Samuelson wrote an essay after the Second World War in which he grouped together four economies in terms of their prospects for the decades ahead. All four had substantial natural resources and substantially educated populations. The four were Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Argentina. One of them stands out today. And the danger of populism, which can sometimes accelerate an economy in the short run, but virtually always does grave damage in the long run, as you in Greece know very well, is, I think, very real in many parts of the world, and frankly, especially real in my country. I think a second Trump administration would be substantially more dangerous than a first Trump administration was. I don't think it's responsible to predict that it will gravely damage the economy in the short run or cause an immediate recession. I don't necessarily think that would happen. But I think there are things that we take for granted in the United States and in some other countries in terms of the ability to enforce contracts, in terms of the structure of taxation and regulation being based on rules and laws and independent judiciaries, not based on deals and favoritism. And we sort of take that for granted and we don't think about it very much, in the same way that most people take the administration of anesthesia for granted when there is surgery. But when the anesthesiologist becomes visible, it's never because something good is happening. And in the same way, when rule of law issues become highly salient, that's grounds for substantial concern. But I am, on net, very mindful of these risks, but also very mindful of a basic principle in viewing the world, which is that events 70% of the time are bad, and trends most of the time are good, and we tend to focus on events rather than trends. And as illustrated by my smartphone, as illustrated by AI, as illustrated by the fact that almost everybody in America today is comfortable with their child marrying someone of a different race. There are a lot of trends that are running in the right direction, and therefore it can be a mistake to overdo pessimism.